All right, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. Sorry, we had a little bit of technical difficulties and had to send the Teams link out. My name is Krista Wolf, and I am a board member for the Federation of State Boards of Physical Therapy, and I want to welcome you all to this regulatory hour session with us. As you know, one of our primary purposes is to provide educational content on key issues that are impacting regulation to all of you. And our regulatory hours are presented every other month. And our next one will be coming on June 18th. And it's going to address how the process of board meetings can be made to be more effective and efficient. Today's webinar, we're going to address how boards that understand and use the doctrine of delegation can pave the way for a more organized and efficient way forward. Before I introduce our esteemed speakers, some housekeeping rules. Please make sure your microphones are muted. If you have any questions during the presentation, please put them in the chat and we'll be sure to address them. And today our speaker is Dale Atkins. Dale has presented to many associations in all matters relating to their operations for not-for-profit corporations, including regulatory activities, education and accreditation, disciplinary actions, model legislation, and all phases of development and administration of licensure exams. He is one busy guy. He has done several presentations for us and we greatly appreciate it. And I'd like to welcome Dale and get it started and hand it over to him.
And thank you so much for that introduction. And I can see both of you and Rich. So give me a thumbs up. You can hear me and you can see the screen. So we can see the PowerPoints. And I'll also express apologies for the quick switch over to Teams and an interesting. I see a thumb come up in the middle. So this is cool. You've all got some technology going. So interesting that we're having these technological issues with today's presentation because I really want you all to be very participatory. So in spite of being asked to use the chat, I will also be asking you to unmute and speak and others as just part of the session. So get ready for that. And I can only see two people and the rest of you look like cartoon characters kind of, or those head things. And so if anybody wants to turn on their camera while they're speaking, that would be great. It just makes it easier to identify who's speaking and others. But let's just get on with the topic here as well, and we'll work our way through this. So again, many thanks to the staff for adjusting based on the Zoom outage, which I understand is coast to coast, so it's not just related to us today. And I'm seeing too. I see that the word April is misspelled. So this is just we're heading on the direction of whatever we're heading into. So let me first off welcome everyone and thank you for being on. Thank you for the adjustments and what have you. As many of you know or have heard me speak, I do like to not only welcome you to today's session and the topic, but really express my sincere thanks to each and every one of you. So the board of directors of your organization, FSBPT, for allowing these regulatory hours to happen, providing these networking opportunities. This isn't about what I say. This is about opportunities for what you all have the chance to get together and speak. And today, especially with the formatting that I'm hoping we can accomplish. But a big thanks to your board of directors for what they do. The volunteerism that I'm surrounded by in my practice is absolutely inspiring. So thanks to the board of directors. To Rich, Jeff, and the rest of the staff, many thanks for what you do to operationalize all of the programs of FSBPT, including today's regulatory hour. So a big shout out thanks to the staff, and I think we all need to recognize the important role that they play. And then lastly, and equally important to all the others, is the big thanks to each and every one of you who are on the line today. Whether you're a board member, staff, executive director, administrator, inspector, assistant attorney general, whatever role it is that you play back in your jurisdictions, you are to be thanked and recognized. You're not thanked enough. You're not recognized. And a lot of folk don't know what regulatory boards do. So you know what you do. I know what you do. And so a big shout out. Thanks for all the volunteerism and others who are involved in regulation in the interest of public protection. So we start those out to say that. And next slide, please. And so as mentioned, I'm Dale Atkinson. I'm an attorney. I represent a whole bunch of groups that are just like FSBPT. Most all of my clients develop, administer, score, and maintain a uniform licensure exam program as their signature, if you will, program, but they provide lots of other programs just like your organization, FSBPT, does. And so I'm hoping that my experience over the 39 years that I've been practicing and representing groups like yours will be helpful today, but that gives you a little perspective of what I bring to the table. The law firm, the Atkinson law firm, our motto is mind shared, and that's truly what these regulatory hours are all about, is having discussions, identifying issues, and perhaps solving a few issues that might surface. So I'm happy to be here, absolutely delighted, and many thanks to FSBPT for having me and be a part of your family. So next slide, please. Now, consistent with the theme of delegation, and in order to try to make this month's regulatory hour maybe a little different and a little more participatory, I'm going to ask you all, and I'm going to delegate to you some of the issues and the discussions that I hope to have. And so you will be asked to participate and unmute. You can introduce yourself however you would like, or your jurisdiction, first name, whatever it takes to identify who is speaking and to help me, because again, I can't see most of you. This is consistent, as I've mentioned, with the theme of delegation. And I really think that what I'm trying to do this month is to see how this goes and to see how a participatory back and forth between attendees can work into the future if possible. And I realize sometimes lectures, or so to speak, lectures are perhaps the right way to go. But today, with delegation in our theme, we're going to continue to try to advance that. And so if you want to go to the next slide. So mentally prepare now, and mentally prepare. And I don't see names of attendees or anything, so I can't even call on anyone. So I might have tried to do that if we were on a Zoom. But so let's delegate. Let's start. Who wants to unmute? Tell us who you are, where you're from, something, and tell me what delegation means to you. Why are we having this topic, and why are we having this discussion today? So anyone want to unmute and have this discussion? This is a really, really critical, important topic. I believe it's not discussed enough, and Rich is going to buy dinner for two for whomever unmutes first, right? Maybe some round trip airfare, whatever we can decide. Go ahead. Somebody, I think someone is unmuted or raised a hand, or I can only see a hand now on a cartoon.
Hi, Dale. Claire Mullen. I serve on the state licensure board for physical therapy in Georgia. I'm having some trouble here. Can't seem to get the camera to turn on. Not sure why. But I think in terms of delegation, when requirements are merely a checkbox, I think those duties to check against a rubric could easily be delegated to someone else.
Okay. So can you tell me more? And it's clear, right? Sorry, because I can't even see names.
Yeah, that's correct. That is correct.
So if I get a name wrong.
I apologize.
Oh, no worries. No worries.
I apologize, but I just cannot seem to get this camera to go on. I'm not sure what that's all about.
No problem.
But our board had a challenge last biennium where they changed the computer platform that folks came in on, and the poor folks in the office had to hand touch over 12,000 applications, pretty much 1 to 2 times each one. But if there was a rubric for them to just bounce it against, it would have been easier than to have to reach out for each one, and it could have been delegated to clerical if it was honestly able to be delegated. It would have helped those folks quite a bit.
Excellent. So there's sounding of an efficiency argument here somewhere, especially in light of if there was a glitch in something, that certain things had to be hand done. So delegation to the clerical side. So excellent. Thank you. Who else wants to speak? And go ahead and unmute and speak. Don't need to raise hands. Just let us know who you are and let's go for it.
Hi, it's Mindy in Arizona. I think for me, if delegation's done right, I think it expands the access to services. And if done incorrectly, well, there's a whole host of things that that we end up seeing. I'm the investigator with the Arizona board.
Excellent, thank you. And again, I'll remember jurisdictions, perhaps not as much names, and I didn't hear the name, but so Arizona now speaking about access to care, perhaps, right?
Yeah.
And that delegation might fall under the category of the practitioners, the licensees who are providing services, and what can be delegated perhaps to an assistant or perhaps other individual within the practice or other licensee, other physical therapist as well. So we have that idea. It looks like another hands up. So go ahead and tell us what you're thinking.
Hey, Jason Kaiser, California. Delegation is an essential daily function, but in California more specifically, it's actually a statutory and regulatory provision, right? So I actually have a regulation on file that delegates the authority from the board members to me as the administrator for certain and specific functions, right? And so there are some things that I can do on behalf of the board through that delegation. And again, some of those things where I'm not allowed to do those things, and I would have to have those items raised to the level of attention of the board.
Excellent. Thank you, Jason. And keep you on the spot there. Keep unmuted. You had mentioned a regulation, I think, right?
I did.
Provided that. And,
yeah, the California Code of Regulations, delegation of functions, and it's 1398.4.
Got it. And does California also have policies that might address some of these issues?
No, if it's outside of statute or regulation, it could be seen as an underground regulation. So we codify everything in reg.
Got it. Okay, excellent. And I see someone else as well with a hand up. Go ahead.
Hi, it's Judy from Arizona. So just bouncing off of what Mindy said, our spectacular investigator, by the way, but I'm not biased. And Jason, delegation can take on a lot of things. It can take on the practice of physical therapy, delegating from a PT to a PTA, just like Jason said, delegating from the board to the executive director. We have that same issue. There are certain things that the board has delegated to me, like such as processing applications, as long as they are very straightforward and there's no red flags or anything. But then there's also things that the board can delegate, for example, to FSBPT. For us, it's the alternate approval pathway. So the board is delegating the exam eligibility from the board or staff over to FSBPT. So I think in a lot of ways, it's a way to expand the care in terms of PTs and PTAs, but it's also a way to expand efficiency or to take advantage of efficiencies that the board can utilize to help within their overall regulatory scope.
Excellent. And now Arizona is starting to address as related to the regulation of physical therapy and physical therapy assistance, which is on the screen now, knowing that delegation is a big concept, but we're applying it there as well. I see another hand. It's just got a 2 on it.
Oh, that might be me. Hi, Dale. It's Nancy from New Jersey. Delegation, as everybody has said, really allows us to expand what we're doing much more efficiently. It allows a lot of access. The biggest thing we see is, you can delegate, but the problem is that too many people abdicate after they delegate and don't exactly take the responsibility that they should be taking when they delegate. So we see issues that come forward when people are delegating inappropriately or delegating outside scope or something in that area.
And you're referring to the practitioners, I think, when you talk about
I'm referring to the practitioners, but also referring to administrative functions as well.
Excellent. And you don't need to answer this unless you want to, but how are we determining then what can and can't be delegated in the arena of regulation?
Well, when it as Jason said, if it's in the regs, it's pretty clear, but it doesn't mean that people necessarily do it correctly.
Right. Excellent. Another hand is up. Go ahead.
It might be me. Hi, I'm Ann Reicherter. Actually not on a board or anything right now. I'm speaking as a PT consumer. And in particular, just having had a wonderful experience with Maryland and renewing my license, I wanted to shout out. But I also wanted to say that anything that can be done to improve efficiency, particularly, obviously, that will decrease cost for the licensees, I'm a big advocate of. And just like anything, any position or any job, there's always room for abuse if it's not managed properly. But I'm a very strong advocate of delegation in both the regulatory setting and definitely in the clinic as well. But I will concur with my former colleagues that talked about just ensuring that that supervision occurs, but that's because people need to follow the regulations just like they do for everything else. Thank you.
And I'm getting a fair amount of feedback, Rich and Jeff. Not sure if everyone is muted or if it's just the sound issue. So, but thank you for that comment, and really enjoy hearing the consumer perspective as well. So thank you for that. I do see another hand up, and I can't tell who it is, but
looks like it's still Ann with her hand raised.
Okay.
So I think we're good at this point.
Okay. So we've identified plenty of issues, and anytime anyone has to say from here out, please feel free to chime in and speak. You can raise your hand, whatever it takes for us to recognize you. But and these slides were actually backwards here. This is the delegation overview, bigger picture, and the previous slide was the specific delegation related to the regulation of physical therapy and physical therapy assistants, or quite frankly, for any profession that we might think about. So if you want to go to the next slide. And so one issue that's at stake here and that is being discussed related to delegation and recognition and authority is this: what authority does the administrative branch, if you will, or the administrative arm, I should say, not branch, the administrative arm of government have? And there are some that are challenging that the administrative bureaucracy is too powerful. And we're going to get to a case at the very end about deference, but we'll save that for just a minute. But what do regulatory boards do? And I must say, while we're on this slide, I do want to emphasize the critical nature of the doctrine of delegation and how that actually can and should work. But where does it go too far? And how are we going to calculate that? And those become eventually legal questions, I believe. But as Jason had mentioned, there's the practical side and what is promulgated into regs that allow authority versus what can be dealt with through policy and otherwise. But before we get that deep into the subject matter, let's continue to step back and talk about, well, what is delegation? So if you go to the next slide, a very critical element to regulating any profession is itself. And so I pulled a definition out here, and I always like even Webster's and others that say we're defining a term in the act of delegating power or authority to another, and they're using the term as we try to define it. I think that second definition, one or more persons chosen to represent others, is a pretty good reflection of what the regulatory community addresses. And you all, many of you are board members and or staff to boards, but if you're a board member, you are acting as a fiduciary. You're acting on behalf of society as a whole in undertaking your responsibilities of decision making, along with staff that is helping to operationalize those decision making issues that are at stake, including, importantly, issuing a license, renewing a license, perhaps taking an adverse action against a license. But the authority of power granted to these boards is where we stop and think. And so if you want to go to the next slide, as you think about delegation, continue to step back. First off, you wouldn't exist as a regulatory board without a delegation principle at stake. So the legislature creates and authorizes the board through the enactment of a statute. So without that statute and without that determination by the legislature that a profession needs to be regulated, your boards wouldn't exist, nor would any other boards, until the legislature steps in and takes action. That's a delegation question. So the legislature is delegating to the physical therapy board that it created and authorized to act. That's the biggest picture, at least that I can think of, related to regulating physical therapy and assistance, or as I've mentioned, any other profession. You've already identified it in a few of your comments today is board to staff. And so how do you delegate authority from the board to the staff? California has elected to use the regulatory process to promulgate regulations. That's the safest way to do it, so that, as mentioned by Jason, you don't have this allegation that you're promulgating regs through policy. But let's think about that. How does board give staff authority? You can promulgate some regs. Perhaps there are policies that would also work that delegate this authority to the staff to do certain things between board meetings. Depending on how often you meet, decisions might have to be made more often than the meeting of the board itself, one. And then two is, what is the board's role versus what is the staff's role? So board to staff, as mentioned by at least one participant, board to FSBPT. And as mentioned, I represent a whole bunch of FSBPTs, and this is a really important concept. There's a delegation principle at stake, and it may be related to an exam program. It may be related to continuing education providers and or programs that exist for purposes of licensure renewal. It may be for purposes of storage of primary source documents through a registry. It may be applications for initial licensure. It may be applications for renewal. But let me be very clear. The delegating that is done from government, your board, to a private entity like FSBPT, in spite of it being your entity, is not decision-making. That delegation is assistance in providing your boards, your government, your agency with information it needs to make that decision. So delegation will never occur, at least in my world and from a legal perspective, from government to the private sector to ultimately make those decisions. And while I'm on that topic, dare I bring this up and get too deep into this, but when legislation is enacted that identifies a private entity like an accrediting body, an educational accrediting body, that's a delegation question. And that may be subject to legal challenge, creating a requirement for licensure and delegating to a private entity over whom regulatory boards have no authority, delegating to that outside entity a mandatory issue related to licensure. So I hope everybody's following me here, versus delegation to an FSBPT where you are FSBPT. You do come to the board meetings. You do introduce resolutions. You do vote for the board of directors and help steer the ship of FSBPT in the directions that the membership collectively wants to go. And so there's a big difference between, is it CAPTE, I believe is your accrediting body in education, or any other entity. And I'm not dissing any of these groups. I'm just suggesting to you that the legal aspects of delegation become important. Can the legislature enact a law that says you must graduate from a CAPTE program? Or does the legislature delegate it to the board, and then the board can promulgate regulations recognizing? You end up in the same place, but it's just a two-step process. So there are some nuanced legal issues that do need to be addressed at some point, but I pause here because of the board to FSBPT delegation, and board to other entities. We've somewhat already talked about that, and that is might be accrediting, it might be continuing education, it could be other aspects. And then, as Jason mentioned, and as we'll distinguish here in our remarks, is the use of policies. When can this be done by policy, or when must it be done by promulgating regulations? And these are interesting questions. You're going to have to seek legal advice on that. But the doctrine of delegation, now stepping all the way back out, is critical for all of us in the regulatory community to understand. And it starts with the legislature, and it then creates, again, authority within the board itself to do certain things, like using your organization, FSBPT. So I'm not sure if we spend enough time conceptually or philosophically thinking about this doctrine of delegation, but without delegation, no regulation would exist. And so we have to understand it. And these are important aspects that do need to be addressed and at least understood philosophically, if not the legal nuances that might arise. So if you want to go to the next slide. So we've kind of already identified this, but I think what's important when it comes to much of the board training that I do for my clients and much of the educational programs that are provided by FSBPT and others like FSBPT is the ability for you all to articulate this back out. So whether you're speaking with a legislator or a legislative committee, whether you're speaking with the media, academics, trade, whatever, we as the regulatory community are not necessarily real good at identifying and articulating some of the issues that probably need to be had. So who next now wants to, and I saw a quick chat fly by, and I don't know how to find my chats on Teams, but about somebody's getting dinner. So maybe we'll get another dinner out there. But who wants to unmute now and articulate to me, why is delegation relevant and important? And we've kind of identified this, but let's hear you all say this. I might take these dinners home. Go ahead. I see a hand that went up.
Hey, Claire Mullen again from Georgia. Certain things like outside entities that must be used for us to record continuing education when there's not a fee, but it may be more convenient for the consumer to upgrade to a private account. Those kind of barriers, I guess, that the consumer may find or report or complain about. I mean, there has to be a way for us to make sure that it's in a database somewhere that's consistent, but at the same time, we have to be mindful that it's efficient if we're really delegating.
And so, Claire, sticking with you now, and that's Georgia, right? Sticking with you now, when anyone says us or we, I'm going to say, who are the us's and the we's? So when you said we have to be able to do that, who's the we there?
As a board to approve, let's just say renewal of licenses. I won't even start with the folks that are brand new. It is a legal obligation of the applicant to meet the laws and rules of our profession established in the legislature. Within the laws may be certain requirements, but within the rules are the ways we are currently choosing to go through with it, I guess, but they carry the same weight, if that makes sense.
Sure, and applause, Claire, to you stepping forward and regurgitating what we're trying to talk about here. And so who else wants to step forward now and say, I'm a legislator and I'm asking you about delegation, its relevance and importance. Please tell me what that means. Who else wants to step up now? And why it's important? Go ahead, Jason.
I think for California, and I think one of the things that I learned early on from FSBPT and just kind of networking with all of different boards across the United States is significantly the differences of structure, size, and for me, the thing that stuck out the most was volume. If my board and its composition of 7 members did not have a delegation to me as the director or the administrator of the program, with, or even to my staff, with some of the ministerial aspects of the board, we would be by effect unoperational just due to the volume. The 7 members could not shoulder that work in and of itself just amongst themselves. So that delegation is so important. That does set parameters of trust and what aspects of business can be done and delegated to staff in the things like the review of applications, the issuances of licenses, the process of renewals and such. Not even going on to look at something like the enforcement process and determining, who conducts the investigation, who makes the decision on whether allegations or an accusation is brought against a licensee. The volume just could not be sustained by 7 people. We would end up with a board of, 40 board members, each with their own kind of unique committee memberships and significant responsibilities. Just would not be attainable.
And to that point, and just to help us to calibrate, how many physical therapists and assistants do you have, just roughly?
Between the 2 license types, about 40,000.
So 40,000. So what Jason's bringing up is, again, a delegation question of reviewing complaints, determining probable cause, investigating, prosecuting. Ultimately, there may be an administrative adverse action that's taken. So another hands up, and thank you, Jason. Go ahead.
Hi, Missy from Ohio. I agree with everything Jason just said. I think though, if I were talking to a legislator, I would also be sure to point out that any and all delegation is based on operations within the laws passed by the legislature and the rules that the board was delegated by the legislature to promulgate, and that we only operate within that scope, because delegation can be tricky when you are talking to legislators who don't want a different interpretation than the one they intended.
And again, great points now. So a deferential answer is what Ohio was kind of giving us examples of. And by the way, if that interpretation by the board, which part of the regulatory board's jobs or physical therapy board job is to interpret ambiguities. If it comes out in the end that the interpretation is inconsistent with the intent of the legislature, they're going to change the law. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's fine how that works, whether it's a scope issue or it's authority issue or anything else. So these are all excellent points as well. So I see a hand up as well. Thank you, Ohio. I see a hand up.
Hi, thank you. Susan Guile with the Kansas Board, and I would just echo everything that Jason and Missy have said, and just add to that I think in addition to what they said, I would also point out that with the delegation, everything we do, our mission is public protection. And so with that delegation, it allows us to meet that mission of public protection, because if we didn't have that delegation authority, as I think Jason said, it would take months and months for us to issue some of the licenses. If we had to wait between board meetings, we meet every other month. I don't know what some of the other boards do. I think some more, some less. But if we had to wait between those board meetings to get the approval at the next meeting for something to happen, and then if because of the volume, because we didn't have the delegatory authority, we didn't get to everything at one board meeting and had to be pushed to the next, it would take a really long time to get some of these licenses issued. And that would mean that there were not PTs and PTAs who could be out there working with patients. So you have patients who aren't getting the services that they need. And it perpetuates that lack of patient protection and patient services.
Excellent. And so we've identified, thank you, Kansas, we've identified in part on this slide too, is the effectiveness and efficiencies of the operations. And so governance structure can become very important. So again, in the concept of what authority do you have as a regulatory board, again, that's a big picture concept of delegation, but what authority you do have may or will be dictated by the governance structure. So what I would call, say, a standalone board, where you have the authority to set your budgets, make your decisions, spend the money, and you do that within the confines, if you will, of the legislation that created you and authorized you, is one set. There's composite boards and there's departmentalized as well. A composite board being regulating multiple professions under some mini, if you will, umbrella, generally related professions, and then departmentalized jurisdictions where boards may be more advisory, don't make final decisions, and recommendations come from the board up into the bureaucracy before they're finalized. And so these are all principles of who has the authority to make the decision, and that will be set in statute. But we all have to get used to articulating back out deferential statements that recognize what boards do and how the delegated authority is then ultimately being used. And so if I were asked the question about delegation and others, I would work in, especially if I was speaking to the legislature, I would work into the comments that the authority of the board is to meet the intent of the legislation. We defer to you because you created us and authorized us to act. And then in the interest of effectiveness and efficiencies, we have a process whereby, and then you finish those thoughts. Ohio, Kansas, and others, California brought those up to make them efficient and those decision-making opportunities. But let's not forget the use and recognition of experts. The reason boards are populated with licensees, if you will, is because you carry the knowledge that's necessary to fulfill the intent of that legislation. And some boards now are being challenged, if you will, or questioned as to whether licensees can regulate their own, if you will, their own competitors or their own other licensees and how that works. And what are the pitfalls to that versus public members? And should there be a balance between those, or should there be an imbalance of more public members than licensees? And this issue surfaced in the 2015 North Carolina State Board of Dental Examiners case. So let's just not forget that the reason that the boards are populated how they are is to create these effectiveness and efficiencies. But that's, again, this is authority delegated to you via that statute. So, and then that top bullet, we're kind of went in reverse order on this slide. That top bullet is physical therapy would not exist without the legislative enactment of laws that do delegate this authority. So I know I'm overemphasizing the point, and I admit that, but I believe it's something we might lose sight of when we step back, and we, being the regulatory community, being boards like yours, when you step back and say, what is it we do? Why do we do it? And how are we going to articulate this to the right individuals, be they legislatures, media, academics, or trade? So this is a concept first that gets us thinking, and then we regurgitate it back out in a manner, hopefully, that is effective and understandable to substantiate the continued existence of the boards through, say, a sunset process or other review that goes on. So don't forget the bigger picture of the doctrine of delegation as we address these. So if you want to go on to the next slide. And thank you to our participants here. Now, if someone wants to unmute and explain to me, how does FSBPT play a role in this delegation discussion? What does FSBPT do? Well, maybe a new person, a new set of a new dinner for two can be given out. Because I think Claire's already got a couple dinners already. She's spoken. Anyone else want to identify? What does FSBPT do, and how does delegation come into play here?
But Dale, this is Kathy Arney from North Carolina. I'm not sure, was someone else going to speak?
No, go ahead. North Carolina.
Okay.
All yours.
Okay. So for me, FSBPT has the ability to help frame important issues in physical therapy regulation, and to be able to communicate that, to help us all talk about it and understand how it affects us differently, but also to maybe help us be able to work on issues in our own state. And so in terms of delegation, I think for me, in part, it's helped me understand when things may be more effectively done through delegation to other entities, when regulation needs to be created about certain things, and how that regulation is created, either with delegation or without delegation. And so, my primary answer, I think, is more about providing regulatory information, helping us understand it, and then to be able to implement it within our own jurisdictions.
Excellent. And thank you, North Carolina. And so I heard education, communication, and not only providing information, and this regulatory hour might be one, but it's also facilitating the communications. It's you all communicating with each other, and FSBPT helps to facilitate that. So there's those components. Who else wants to speak up? Again, focusing on the issue of delegation.
Well, I think to some degree, I'm sorry, this is Stacy from Georgia. I think that some of the authority that's been delegated to FSBPT from the jurisdictions would be their exam services. We trust that they are doing or taking the necessary steps to ensure that the content on the national exams for licensure will help to ensure that our applicants or licensees can meet minimum standards, or at least have the knowledge of how of meeting minimum standards for practicing in the various jurisdictions.
Excellent. And thank you, Stacy. Now there's getting, that's hitting the nail on the head. Is the reason that FSBPT and other groups like it exist is to provide programs and services that assist in this determination of licensure eligibility. Again, FSBPT facilitates your decision making, your being the member boards, the regulatory boards themselves. But in doing so, they provide a service that enhances uniformity, promotes mobility and portability programs and others. And that one of those programs is the national exam, right? And it can be developed much more efficiently by your organization and then relied upon, as Stacy mentioned. That's a delegation question. She used the word trust. We trust the exam program is legally defensible as a minimum competency determiner, and we now will rely upon it as one component of licensure eligibility. And the beauty of that, and I've been around long enough, I remember when the evolution of many of my clients where their member boards wanted to develop their own exams. So you could have 50 different exam programs or what have you. And eventually you see the regulatory community sees the benefit of a uniform approach, one, and two is more importantly is it's developed in a manner that can be legally defended. And you all know that. I'm not saying anything that you don't already know, but that defensibility can be very important because your boards could not afford to develop each and every one of your boards to develop a legally defensible program. Plus, you would destroy your uniformity issues. But I think I saw a hand go up. I think that said Rebecca. Go ahead. Rich, who has their hand up? Can you tell?
Rebecca, you are muted.
Oh yeah, sorry.
Thank you. Hello, Dale.
Howdy.
In addition to exam services, we should also bring in what we're delegating to FSBPT, and they're returning to us through the ELDD. That's critical that we've turned authority to track individuals to them and then rely on FSBPT to push out the information to each of the jurisdictions.
Again, a terrific program that provides a one-stop shop, if you will, for the member boards to come to and rely upon that. And all of those programs, the exam may fall in a different bucket, but all those programs are dependent upon your participation, your being the member boards. And so ELDD, perfect example as well. And so I get back to ensuring that while I believe all of us on the line today and the rest of your membership knows the importance of collective wisdom, FSBPT, exam programs, ELDD, I like to hear us practice saying that, because when it needs to be said, we can articulate that in a manner that is not only understandable, but it's convincing for purposes of the continued existence of a board at the state level or of FSBPT at the more collective level itself as well. So think about that, and that's part of this exercise. And why I was hoping many of you will speak is to again reflect that ability to articulate that. So please go to the next slide, or if anybody has anything else to say about this topic, feel free to jump in, but you can go to the next slide. So here's what you've already talked about: the exam program, the LDD, and other ideas. And I threw these ideas out. These are what my clients work on: CE provider and programs that are recognized. They meet the standards, and therefore, instead of each member board having to assess whether an continuing educational program is, if you will, worthy or meets the the requirements, they can rely upon a uniform program or a uniform provider system that identifies that. Audits, application processing, registries, and registries to me hold primary source documents for purposes of not only potentially initial licensure, but mobility and otherwise. Primary source documents, foreign educated, whatever it takes. And you all have the NCPPT, if I get the acronym correct. But so these are collective wisdom issues. These are all delegation principles. But remember, and I will emphasize, decision-making will always fall with the government entity. FSBPT and other clients just like them provide and facilitate the exchange or the holding of information that exists. So next slide, please. And Rich or Jeff, if there's anything to add about programs, please feel free to do that. But who wants to tell me now what does deference mean to you? And there's a hand still up, but I think it might be Rebecca still, but I can't tell. So somebody tell me what is the principle of deference? What does that mean? Go ahead, Jason. You get 3 dinners now. You're up to 3 dinners.
I guess acknowledging and following the authority of another entity, right? Respect for the authority of another agency or entity.
Excellent. And while I've got you, Jason, how is that relevant to our discussion today, do you think?
In California today, it seems like it's about one of the most relevant things that's on my dartboard of work, is that the overlap of, as an example, the overlap of scopes of practice with the physical therapy board and other professions. There are more overlaps than any other board or profession has overlaps with other boards and professions. So in respect to scopes of practice and deference for those particular regulating agencies and how they go about regulating their professions, in deference to our brother and sister courts at the criminal and civil levels, the partners that we work with from one day to another, as an example, in California, the Attorney General's office, the Office of Administrative Hearings, those kind of things. So.
Excellent, thank you. Anyone else gonna jump in? Go ahead, Claire. And you're still muted if you're speaking.
When folks are coming to us and having been found to be in violation of law that involves self-compromised ability to perform their duties, and we delegate it to other professions to determine when they are, how do I want to say this, safe to practice again medically. So there's deference there as well. We're not psychologists, we're not rehab folks, but we need to decide who on what panel satisfies the need of safe practice. And if folks jump the gun and go to an outside practitioner, we don't really know whether we can defer.
Excellent. And so we're starting to now hear our own words to interpret. And if you want to go to the next slide, Rich, please. So the principle of deference can be very important because the question is decisions are made by administrative bodies who have been delegated with authority. Well, do we rely upon those? And how do we rely upon those? With emphasis on if they're challenged and they move into the judicial system, well, what do we, the courts, rely upon for purposes of that ultimate decision? And it might be interpretation, again, of ambiguous language in the statute or otherwise. I think everybody's familiar with the Supreme Court case from last June. If you want to go to the next slide, where the U.S. Supreme Court overturned or reversed the doctrine of deference related to administrative bodies' interpretation of ambiguities in the law. Now, this Loper case is relevant only to federal, not state law, but this decision could have influence over the principles of deference. But deference is important because delegation of authority is not unlimited. And so legislators created your board, they granted you authority, and you, as part of that authority, might interpret ambiguous language. Your interpretation gets challenged into the court system, and the courts say, do we have to defer to the knowledge of the experts, or do we look at that de novo, if you will? So an emphasis to make sure we understand this case relates to interpretations of ambiguities in the law, not findings of fact or other matters that are not subject to legal review, if you will, by the judiciary. So it's a recognition of the judicial branch which steps in. I think the Loper decision is the correct decision, by the way, overall, and that the courts have the right to not defer to an interpretation of ambiguities in the law, because that's what the Administrative Procedures Act says, by the way, under federal law. So taking this now back into our big picture topic is you make decisions, and those decisions might be challenged. And you are able to make decisions because this has been delegated to you, the authority to make those decisions. So don't forget about the principle of deference. And I think we're running close to our last couple of minutes here, but don't forget about the principle of deference as you think about the doctrine of delegation and why you exist in the first place itself. And so, so if you want to go to the next slide, it's going to be the thank you slide, or the wrap up slide. So one is, I hope this was helpful. I feel like it might have been a little choppy, but these are hard to do, perhaps not in person, but I'm so thankful to all of you for being on, but also for those of you who participated in helping, again, identify what words do you use to identify these big picture issues that exist. I don't know if we spend enough time on those, so I'm really happy to hear what you all have to say. So again, a big thanks to you. Because of you, hopefully this was the best session ever. But if you have comments and you want to make those to staff or to through an evaluation process, please let me know. Generally, I more lecture, I guess we'd call it, rather than have you all participate. But I just absolutely am delighted that some of you participated and we got to articulate that as well. So if you want to go to the next slide as well, and that would be my thanks to each and every one of you. Board of Directors, big shout out, thanks. Staff operationalizing all of this, again, big thanks. But each and every one of you for being on the call today. Thanks for being here. And if anybody has anything you want to say, both content or process driven, please feel free to do so now. And I know staff and myself would take this into consideration to make sure we provide you with relevant information. So Rich and or Jeff or board of director member, now I can't remember who that was. If there's anything to add as a conclusory remarks, please feel free to do that now. But shout out thanks to each and every one of you.
Thanks, Dale. This is Krista Wolf. I just want to remind everyone that our next session will be June 18th. If you're interested and if you have any feedback, please be sure to get that to us. And I hope everyone has a great rest of their week.